Welcome, everybody. My name is Thomas Junot. I'm an associate professor at the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Ottawa, and involved with the Center for International Policy Studies, which is the host for today's event. Very happy that we have a very good group with us. I see that the numbers are still slowly going up, so that some people are still joining us. This is the third event on Yemen that we've organized in 3 years. At the CIPS. 2 years ago, we had Farah al-Muslimi from the Sana Center who joined us. Last year, we had an event just about a year ago on South Yemen, where we had 4 speakers from the south of the country, some based in Canada, but one based in the US, and we really focused on the southern dimension. And this year, we are taking a slightly different direction, but I was still very keen on organizing an event specifically on Yemen. So we are very, very happy that we have 2 speakers and that we can actually hear them both this morning to talk to us about Yemen. First up will be Maisa Shuja'addin, who is a non-resident fellow at the Sana Center for Strategic Studies. Those of you who work on Yemen, who follow Yemen, you have certainly read her over the years. She has published widely in a number of outlets on Yemen, politics, the peace process, and so on. And our second speaker will be Abdul Ghani Al-Iriani, who is also a non-resident fellow at the Sana Center, who has also written very widely on Yemen and has over 3 decades of experience as a political and development consultant. I would also add that both are on Twitter, so if you don't follow them, I strongly suggest that you do for very good analysis and insights on the situation in Yemen. So the format today will be very simple. We will start with a 10 to 15 minute presentation, first by Maisa and then by Abdul Ghani. And after that, we will have a Q&A. For the Q&A, the way we are going to work, since this is a pretty large group, if you go at the bottom of your screen, there is an icon where it says more with 3 little dots. In there, please use the Q&A function, not the chat one. I'll repeat that later on. But with a large group like this, we're up to 55 and we do have over 100 registrations, so more people may join. The chat room becomes really congested and it becomes complicated. The Q&A is easier for me to manage, so post your questions. If there are too many, I will unfortunately have to make a selection, but I will read them out loud to our 2 guest speakers, and then I will let the 2 of you answer every time. So if that works for everybody, thanks a lot again. And we will start right away with Maisa. Thanks a lot for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. In my intervention, I will focus on 2 points. First of all, I will try to map the local powers in Yemen. At the beginning of the war started in March 2015. At the beginning, we have 2 warring parties, Houthi Saleh coalition from side and the government from other side. Now the situation is totally different and we have several divisions on the ground. Houthi Saleh's coalition split in 2017. Saleh was killed by the Houthis in December 2017, and the power of the Saleh, most of it went to the Houthis, his tribal network. He had a very large tribal network, and most of this went to the Houthis. The Congress Party, it was the ruling party during Saleh era, and he was the president for 33 years. This Congress Party is divided between multiple players. One of them, part of them, they remain in Sana'a. Part of them, they are loyal to Saudi Arabia, part of them to the Emiratis, and part of them to the Omanis. Also, Saleh family, his oldest son in Abu Dhabi, most of his family in Oman and Muscat, and the most important, his nephew. It is he has a military base. He's supported by the Emiratis, and this military base on the western coast in Yemen in the north. This is about Saleh, and now so we are with a sole power in the north, most of the north, which was known as the north of Yemen before the unity in 1990. It is the Houthi. The Houthi now, they are controlling the majority of population of Yemen, maybe 70% of Yemeni population under the Houthi control. They are very organized. Military-wise, they are the most powerful group in Yemen. They are also controlling the state institution. Yemen was a very centralized state before the war. So all the state institution, they inherited all the state institution, most of the army, and they are taking advantage of all of this. They have a leadership, they have a structure, they are very organized, but I don't say they are very popular in their areas. When we talk about the Houthis and the peace process, definitely the Houthis, they are a very big or major military power, but they are very minor on the level of political and social levels. They are a very minor social group. Politically, they don't have that big experience. So when it's not realistic to talk about applying the UN resolution that was issued at the beginning of the war, that the Houthis should submit their weapons to the government. They will never lay down their weapons because they are relying on force excessively. So the Houthis, after the war, they will demand for sharing of power according to their military power, not according to their political and social power. And that means that we are not going to election, because through election they will not win a lot according to their political and social size. This is from the side of the Houthi Saleh at the beginning of the war. At the beginning of the war also, there was a government from another side. The legitimate government is supported by the Saudis. And when we talk about the government at the beginning of the war, so we are talking about the main political parties in Yemen. The biggest political party is Islah Party. Islah Party is a complex party. It is tribal network, some Salafis, and the biggest group is the Brotherhood. Actually, it's the Brotherhood Party. And we have the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party, it was the ruling party of the South before the unity, and the Nasseris, and the Southern Resistance. Now, after 6 years of war, and the government is getting very weak, so we are talking about the anti-Houthi camp, because some powers or some divisions, anti-Houthi, they are also anti the government as well. For example, Tariq Saleh, he's supported by the Emiratis. He's against the Houthis, but he didn't recognize Hadi as a legitimate president. So he is also against the government. Also the STC, the Southern Transitional Council, they are against the Houthis, but also they are against the government, or they are seeing the government as an obstacle for their goals. So the most important fiction inside this government, it is the Brotherhood, it is Islah. And Islah, they are protecting Hadi, and they are keeping Hadi. Although Hadi is becoming an obstacle for any peace process, because he knows that any end of this war means the end of his presidency. But the Islahis keeping him because they believe that Hadi is a political cover that they need to protect them from the Emiratis, from the political powers that are supported by the Emiratis, whether Tariq Saleh in the West or the SCC in the South. And they have enmity with the Houthis in the North for sectarian reasons. And they know that the Emiratis, they don't marginalize them politically. They don't want them to even exist. So this is for the Islah Party. They are protecting Hadi, and Hadi need them because his party, Congress Party, the biggest of this party, is not loyal to him. So he needs a political fiction that supported him. And he doesn't have any popular base. He's not a popular person, and he's not charismatic. He doesn't have tribal network. So he needs a Islah Party. So when we talk about the government, mainly we are talking about President Hadi, his sons, and Islah Party. Other fictions we have, actually Emiratis established STC. STC is a Southern Transitional Council. STC is demanding a Southern independent state. It's found in 2017. STC is now controlling Aden. the transitional capital. And SCC, they are representing mainly the Western governorates from Aden, Dala and Lahj. And this government has a long history of conflicts with the Eastern governorates of Aden, Shabwa and Abiyan, and Hadi belongs from this governorates. Actually, the situation in the south somehow complex because it's more fragmented. The foreign actors are much more, and also we have. When we talk about the north, we are talking mainly about the Brotherhood in Taiz. It is in the middle of Yemen. It is in the north. About their strong presence and influence in Marib in the east, about Tariq Saleh in the west, and the biggest part with the Houthis. But when you talk about north, it's more complex. For example, Hadramaut is the biggest governorate in the north. They are represented by the inclusive Hadramaut conference. This conference gathered most of the Hadrami powers, most of the Hadrami figures, and they are demanding autonomous of Hadramaut, whether inside Yemeni United State or Southern independent state. And we have Al-Mahara, it is on the borders with Oman, and they are tribally dividing between Omanis and Saudis. So the situation, we can say it's very complicated. And I think the peace process will take time to involve in a real peace process in Yemen. Until that, when we talk about Yemen, we are talking about the worst humanitarian situation in the world, or the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. And I think it is a result of the gap, or of the huge gap between the different ruling elites or of the different militia or groups that are controlling Yemen now and their local communities, because all of them, they are relying on force, they are relying on the foreign support, and they don't care a lot about their local communities. So I'm encouraging a lot in this situation that we have to support or to strengthen the local governance in Yemen, even on a very low level. We have the local councils. Ali Abdullah Saleh established that before, in the end of his presidency. I think we can give them more authority. We can reform their performance. We can give them more financial resources. Because, for example, Hadi is out of the country. He's living in Riyadh and he's very corrupt. And also the STC, they are living in Abu Dhabi, the leaders of STC. If we talk about the Houthis, most of them, they are some Sada, and they are disconnecting with their societies or with their community, and they are very corrupt and unpopular. So this local governance, if we talk about the tribal areas, so we have tribal structure, tribal sheikh, and the people choosing somehow their tribal, their sheikhs, and this sheikh has family connections, he's living with them, so he can provide them services more than the big power that is disconnecting with their with the society or with the communities. Also in the non-tribal areas, for example, in the middle, in the west, we have a structure like Aqil Hara. He's a person who's choosing by the neighborhood, and he's living with them. It's the same case of the tribal sheikhs, but he doesn't have armed men, definitely, and he doesn't have tribal structure, but it is the same thing, that he's one chosen by those communities, very small communities. And when he provides them service or anything, actually he is providing to his family, because he's living with them and he's accessible, he's in a daily contact with them. So I believe that encouraging local governance in Yemen, support local governance in Yemen, it can decrease the level of people suffering in Yemen. And I think I took my time. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Maisa. That was great. That was a really good overview, and there's a lot of questions to build on that. So Abdul Ghani, I would ask you to put your video back on and to unmute yourself so that we can give you the floor, so that you can give us your 10 to 15-minute presentation.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Maisa. I'm going to talk about the regional and international involvement in the conflict in Yemen. And although everyone expects me to talk about the current state of affairs, I'd like to spend more time on the background, because I do have a different reading from the majority, and I'd like to present it of the roles of various regional and international actors. If I were to describe the regional, international, and involvement in Yemen conflict in one sentence, I'd say it's a tragedy of errors. And this is why I need to speak at length, so that perhaps then I could flush out those errors. The key players are mainly regional, with major international powers such as the P5, the EU, and Germany playing a supporting role. The key regional players are Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iran, and to a lesser extent, Oman. And then there's Qatar and Turkey, who are playing very marginal role, but it's marginal, but it's a growing role. And a good point to start in this presentation is the Arab Spring uprising in February 2011, the event that brought Yemen to international focus. And if you look at the reaction of each player to the 2011 uprising, then some questions may, actually a lot of questions will arise. Saudi Arabia's response was quite strange. While it gave lots of money to Saleh to counter the uprising, it did nothing else. Abu Faris, the Saudi ambassador, rarely attended the meetings of the mediating a peaceful transfer of power. When Saudi approval of an issue was needed, often the British ambassador would say, "I'll get Abu Faris approval," or even Abu Faris agrees to this. Very little involvement. At that time, KSA, having cut back or eliminated altogether the patronage payments to a vast network of clients in Yemen, was actually deriving less influence from those clients than it was from its US and UK allies. In July 2014, when Houthis took Amran, 50 kilometers north of Sana'a, KSA sent its generals to the Pentagon to develop plans for military intervention to stop them. The US advised KSA not to, but of course went through the drill of developing those plans. At the same time, Hadi refused to issue the request for the Saudis to intervene, and I'm guessing that he may have listened to the advice of the one person that he listened to most, and that is Ambassador Feinstein. I wonder if Ambassador Feinstein with us, if he would correct me in this. Saudi intervention when the Houthis were still in Amran would have done much more to stop the Houthis and much less bloodshed and destruction. That's the KSA. The UAE was not really interested in Yemen. Its interest in the Aden Port Container Terminal, which had been leased to Dubai Ports World for 25 years, was not worth the investment of $85 million that was stipulated in the lease agreement. So in 2012, when DP World failed to make the investment, the government of Yemen annulled the agreement. The UAE did not react at all. However, when the war started, UAE willingly sent its troops and spent billions of dollars in Yemen. People sometimes speculate that the UAE has economic interests in the ports and islands of South Yemen, but which ports? The one that was not worth $85 million and just 3 years earlier. Iran, on the other hand, astutely and covertly supported its Houthi allies. By the time Houthi surrounded Sana'a in 2015, it became clear that Iran was fully involved in their campaign. President Hadi received a letter from an officer of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards who identified himself as officer in charge of the Yemen Theater of Operations and the Guards. In the letter, he promised that Houthis would not go into the city and negotiated various details on their behalf. the letter was so strange. I think it was meant to buy time for the Houthis, but it exposed the Iranian significant role in the takeover of Sana'a. Qatar had a more active role during the uprising, mostly supporting the uprising and Islah and broadcasting favorable coverage in Al Jazeera. The only GCC state that was consistent and constructive in its engagement during that period and until today was Oman. As for the international actors, they were in consensus in supporting a peaceful political transition. That consensus was in fact the salient factor in reaching the GCC initiative agreement, and that stipulated the transfer of power from Saleh to Hadi and the national dialogue to build a new Yemen, an inclusive, democratic political system. But after the GCC initiative was signed, the international actors breathed a sigh of relief and turned their attention elsewhere, while political tensions continued to build during the transitional period, and Houthis steadily advanced towards Sana'a. Most Yemenis believe that the US and the UK conspired to let Houthis take over. While this is far-fetched, I think the US and the UK were not alarmed enough by the Houthi advance. One reason for lack of alarm, I think, was that they considered the Houthis as a less threatening natural enemy of AQAP. So now, this is before the war. This takes us to the war. Since the beginning of the war, KSA took the lead in Yemen. KSA made no or very little effort to bring the war to an end, did not provide the necessary weapons for the army of the internationally recognized government to make it possible for them to win, and occasionally bombed them when they advanced in Houthi areas of control. The Saudis kept the conflict at low intensity or at an acceptable level of violence from 2016 until basically now. I think Saudi incompetence and Saudi corruption was part of it, but there's a lot more than that. However, that Saudi incompetence and corruption ensured a series of Houthi victories over these years. I once speculated that KSA was keeping Yemen conflict alive until such time that it could grab the long sought corridor through eastern Yemen to the Indian Ocean. Once the conflict is over, boundaries will be hard to change. So the conflict was kept open. However, over the past 2 years, KSA took over the area it had from 1991 until 2003, negotiated with former President Saleh to build a pipeline through. That is the area from Kharahir on the Saudi border to Nishtun port on the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean. They've occupied that area. But if they still entertain the idea of the designs of having taken sovereignty over this land, I think they can no longer do that, because UAE, Oman, Qatar, and I think with support from the US, are making it impossible. The Saudis, I think, are in a difficult position. Western military men, and even the UAE ones, privately complained the Saudis have no army. But that's not their biggest problem. I think they could have done what they they always did, which is use dollar diplomacy to achieve their strategic objectives. I think their greatest challenge is the extreme centralization of their decision-making and the crippling divisions among their institutions. It has now become so apparent that they could not execute a successful campaign in Yemen if their lives depended on it. For a period in 2019, the Saudis conducted secret negotiations with the Houthis to extricate themselves from Yemen. I know the Houthis were serious about that. However, the negotiations failed because the Saudis didn't know how to get out of Yemen without admitting defeat. Still, as time passes, their situation is getting even worse. As for the UAE, I think it has one main interest in the war, which is to prevent KSA from getting that pipeline corridor. All other issues, ports, islands, military bases, etc., are explained by what I called a kid in a candy store syndrome. Once they took over the south, they wanted to grab things. Their planning was effective. Their objectives were clear. Their execution was professional. Once they took over the south, they made it clear that they will work in support of Saudi Arabia to defeat the Houthis, return Hadi to Sana'a, and preserve the unity and territorial integrity of Yemen. Failing that, they will ensure that the southern state is restored and its unity and territorial integrity are maintained. Either way, no Saudi corridor. In 2017, when it became clear that Saudi Arabia was dragging its feet in the war, Amalika brigades established by the UAE pushed along the west coast in Operation Golden Spear with the intention of breaking that static confrontation. These forces moved several hundred kilometers up the coast to Hodeidah, while Saudi-supported forces moved less than 13 kilometers down the north end of the west coast. UAE was intent on taking Hodeidah despite the massive humanitarian disaster that it would cause, and counting on the resulting international pressure to get the Saudis to sue for peace. Fortunately for Hodeidah, Khashoggi was killed, and the international pressure forced the Saudis to allow the Stockholm Agreement. However, when that did not lead to an end of the war, the UAE turned its attention to harassing KSA's allies and keeping it blindsided by tensions in the south. For a year now, KSA has been busy with the situation in the south and the Riyadh Agreement, while Houthis create facts on the ground that will force KSA to make painful concessions. UAE interests intersect with those of the Houthis in 2 points: frustrating Saudi designs and destroying Islah Party. And I think Houthis have been very careful to keep that intersection going. As for Oman, Oman is slowly getting drawn into the conflict, especially when Saudi forces advanced in Al-Mahra along Omani borders, and now they are supporting local tribes to resist Saudi incursion. Qatar and Turkey are now getting into the act as well. With regional competition raging, they naturally are taking the opportunity to harass KSA and UAE in Yemen. As for the international community, the US and the UK are basically doing what the Saudis want. As the pen holder, UK maintains a higher level of visible engagement than the US. The US is encumbered by the lack of coherence of its agency's policy for Yemen and that of the West Wing. As compared to the need to service Saudi-American relations, Yemen is so insignificant. To my knowledge, none of the Yemen desks in Pentagon, State, or the NSC are currently occupied. Overall, the international player's role since the beginning of the war has become secondary and supportive to that of Saudi Arabia. At the beginning of the war, the UNSC adopted several resolutions against Houthis and Saleh. The most significant of them is Resolution 2216, which in effect demands Houthi surrender and handover of weapons and so on. Actually had a purpose. It was meant as a deterrent. It was meant to dissuade the Houthis from completing their takeover of the state institutions and to encourage them to return to the negotiation table. So that resolution had a shelf life of a few weeks, a few months at most. When it had become clear that it did not deter the Houthis, it became an obstacle to peace. It raised the bar so high that Houthis could not seriously and in good faith negotiate under it. Other than these resolutions, the international players just gave free pass to KSA and also to the UAE to do what they wanted. And in effect, they continued to sell KSA the rope by which to hang itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to both of you. That was very, very good, very informative. So to those who came in late, I just want to repeat the process that we have for the Q&A for the next 45 minutes or so. If you go to the bottom right of your Zoom screen, there is a button that says More with 3 little dots. If you click on that, you have a number of options. One of them is Q&A. Please use the Q&A one. A few people have put messages on the chat board. That's fine to say hi to everybody. That's very nice. But for the actual Q&A, please press on Q&A, and then you will see a box. So for now, I have 3 questions, and a 4th one just popped up. So I will go through them in order, and we'll see where that takes us in terms of time. So first question goes to Maisa. The conflict in Al-Baida and the tribal militia and the GPC in that region. Can you give us a bit of an overview, and obviously Abdul Ghani, if you want to jump in, feel free to do that, on where we're at in the Al-Baida area in terms of the presence of the GPC, of Al-Qaeda militants as part of the anti-Houthi coalition?
It's end, actually, the conflict in Al-Baida in behalf of the Houthis. Now they are controlling the area as they were. It's Tariq al-Awadi. He's one of the Congress Party leaders, and he was Bruce Saleh. And he has conflict with the Houthis, but actually for the Houthis, even before this dispute with the al-Awadi, this area was under their control, because they are taking advantage of the tribal divisions in Al-Baida. It's something different than Marib. In Marib, the tribal network is more united, and they can unite themselves against the Houthis. But in Al-Baida, they can divide the tribes, and the tribes, they have that divisions, internal divisions, and revenge between each other, and the Houthis use that always, and he's controlling Al-Baida. I don't know if Abdul Ghani has another addition for this.
Not really. I think that Yasser was...
Yasser, sorry.
Yeah, Yasser al-Awadi, not Yasser al-Yamani, of course. He gave the Houthis a great gift by handing Al-Baida over to them. He did not fight. He did not stand his ground. He left as soon as the fighting started. That's very curious.
Thank you. So next question, an interesting one, and can you tell us, and I think that can be definitely the two of you, a bit about the popularity of the Houthis. How are they perceived in their core areas, but as they've over the last 6+ years, as they've expanded the territory under their control, so in their non-core areas, how popular are they, in your view? Maybe starting with Abdul Ghani this time.
Okay. Sorry.
They are hated mostly by everyone. Their popularity is very limited. They have been conducting indoctrination campaigns in schools and camps and military bases and all over the place. And that is improving their image a little. But generally, people see them as outsiders. They see them as usurpers. And of course, they resort to extreme violence. So people generally don't like them. Even in Sa'dah, they do not enjoy the full approval, as a good part of the population of Sa'dah did not fought against them and did not accept them. And many sheikhs were kicked out of Sa'dah.
I will add for this also that the Houthis are relying on force, and they're controlling this area. So in Yemen, if you use force, this will turn against you after time. I mean that, for example, Ali Abdullah Saleh take the south by force in 1994, and they turned against him 12 years later in 2006. So in Yemen, force can work, but not for a long time. Because force means revenge, means more enemies, and relying on force only, like what the Houthi did, what the Houthi are doing now, will create a lot of enemies. And the Houthis, if they show any sign of weakness, I can assure you that the number of their enemies are really many inside their areas. Also the nature of the Houthis, they are very regional, and they are most of them, they are some Sada, and they are very a minor group. Most of them, they are even not Zaydis, they are less than this, they are Hashemites who claim they are the descendants of the Prophet. And they didn't develop any kind of, we can say, interest network like Ali Abdullah Saleh. He built like a personal network with tribal sheikhs. His corruption network was really big during Ali Abdullah Saleh, but the corruption network during Houthis is very limited, very small. So the people who benefit from their corruption are really, really few. So because of all of this, the Houthis are not popular at all in their areas.
Thank you very much. The next question is actually related to this. It's on the status of Baha'is in Yemen, especially in Houthi areas. We see, press reports every now and then on the treatment of Baha'is by the Houthis, the brutal treatment. Some of them were released at some point. Can you give us a bit of context on their presence in Yemen, maybe for those participants who are not aware? And then maybe a few words on how the Houthis have treated them, maybe this time starting with Maisa.
Okay. The Baha'is in Yemen, they are almost 1,000. This is what Human Rights Watch said. And they say they are 7,000, which is big. Mostly they are living in Sana'a, areas around Sana'a, in tribal areas, actually. And the Baha'i definitely, they live peacefully somehow. The first case, it was when Haidara was arrested by Hadi government, actually. And he was arrested that he is working for Iran at that time. And then Houthis keep him arrested when they took the power that he is working for Israel, not Iran this time. And he was sentenced to death penalty. And other Baha'is were arrested. It's actually a big case, but almost 6 of them, the Houthis agreed that send them to exile outside of Yemen and release them and send them to exile, actually. And still the case is in the Yemeni courts. Definitely the judicial system is under the Houthi control, and it's very corrupted. And still the case is going on, and definitely the process is very unjust, it lacks everything, it lacks transparency. So I think it's not only the case of Baha'i, also the Houthis forced the Jew to leave Yemen at the beginning when they took, first of all, when they took over Sada, they forced them to leave Sada. And then they forced them, when they took over Sana'a, they forced them to leave Sana'a, and they are now just very few people in Yemen.
Do you want to add anything, Abdul Ghani?
I just want to say that ordering the Baha'is out is not accurate. The Baha'is were happy to leave because at any moment, if somebody radical from the movement decides to go after them, they could be executed. So the Houthis do not tolerate dissent. They don't tolerate the other. And I think that the Baha'is' fate is going to be similar to that of the last Yemeni Jews who had to leave the country.
But I think this is according to what Baha'i said, that they gave them the option whether staying at jail or leaving Yemen. Definitely they prefer leaving Yemen, but this cannot be the options for them. They are Yemenis and they have to remain in Yemen since they are not accusing by anything and by anything seriously proved against them.
Thank you. So the next question, we'll start with Abdul Ghani because it concerns a point you made, but if Maisa, you want to jump after his answer, please feel free to do that. This is one of the many million-dollar questions on Yemen. What are the Saudis' options to end the war? I think, Abdul Ghani, you had some very good analysis, some very good images of the rope that they're using to hang themselves. They will have to make painful compromises. Can you break that down a bit? What are these painful compromises that Saudi would have to make? Is it likely that they will make them in the short or midterm? And what would be the costs?
I think the Saudis, the end of the war is in the hand of the Saudis more than any other party. The Saudis could talk to the Houthis, ensure that a proper arrangement of guarantees is established so that the Houthis would feel safe that the Saudis will keep their end of any agreement, and they could proceed accordingly. However, I don't think the Saudis are in a position to do anything now. They are so divided internally, and the system is paralyzed by infighting and by concentration of the decision making in the hand of Mohammed bin Salman, MBS. And maybe if Mohammed bin Salman becomes king, then maybe there will be, I'll have hope. But right now, as he's so busy with his internal battle, I don't think they'll move anywhere.
Maisa, do you want to add something?
Actually, the war after 6 years war, now the Houthis is becoming much stronger, much empowered, and it's difficult to find any incentive to engage them in any peace process. I think the Saudis, they don't have any face-saving exit now in Yemen.
Mm.
Maybe as I know, they are asking for decreasing or cut the relationship between the Houthis and Iran. And the Houthis, they respond, they say that they can do it. They can decrease the relationship, but not cut it, but on long run. But the war is going on the opposite line, on the opposite way that the Saudi is aiming. They want the Houthis to weaken the Houthis, and now the result is the Houthis is becoming very strong, very powerful, and they want to decrease the relationship with the between the Houthis and Iran. Now this relationship is getting much closer than before the war.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is in a way directly related to the previous one. And again, we can go to the two of you for an answer. What would be the impact of a Biden presidency if Joe Biden wins in 3-4 weeks? You talked a lot about the American approach, I guess, going back to Obama at the beginning, and how, again, they gave Saudi Arabia the rope to hang themselves with. Would anything change with a President Biden? And if yes, how?
I think that although it's a problem that the US system is not able to make any serious say initiatives, the Saudi bottleneck will still stop the Biden administration from advancing the cause of peace in Yemen, unless the Saudis settle their own political crisis. Then there will be no advance. If, on the other hand, Biden is willing to go all the way and go against bin Salman, that will be a huge breakthrough.
Maisa, do you want to add something? Thank you. We actually have about 20 questions in the pipeline. So it's very good that you're keeping your answers brief, because that will allow us to go through at least a lot, maybe all of these questions. And thank you, obviously, to those who are submitting questions. Next question from Sarah is also a very interesting question on the role of religion and sectarianism in the war. How significant is it? Sarah asks at the grassroots level, but I would ask also at higher political levels. And this is an interesting question. And looking at this from the Western perspective, where the war in Yemen, to the extent that there's only limited attention, is often framed in the media as a Sunni versus Shia, Saudi Arabia versus Iran, and so on. What are your views on that? Starting with Maisa, how accurate is that? generally speaking, what is the role of religion in the conflict?
Yeah, it is somehow misleading when we talk about it as a sectarian conflict in Yemen. First of all, the sectarian division in Yemen is a regional division, the first level. When we talk about Zaydis, we are talking about region. But we talk about tribal regional area. It is in most of it, it's the north of Sana'a and some areas south of Sana'a. So it's a regional power. It's interesting to know that, for example, Ali Abdullah Saleh, he was a Zaydi. Regionally, he was a Zaydi. But he, for example, he was supported by Sunni Muslim movements like Brotherhood, like Salafis. But he's not a sectarian man, definitely. He doesn't have any beliefs. He doesn't have any beliefs. But I mean that sometimes when we talk about Zaydi in Yemen, we are talking about it mainly about regional identity, not sectarian identity, because the differences between Zaydis and Sunnis in Yemen is really few and it's not significant at all. So because of that, it's more regional division in Yemen. And but the religious groups are used heavily by the regional powers. Iranian, they are using the Houthis, and the Houthis, they are definitely sectarian group, and they are using religion, and they are mobilizing the people on the base of the religion, and their speech, it's for the first time that we are seeing a hated speech against Sunnis among the Zaydis. It's among the Houthis, definitely. It's coming from the Houthis only. On the other side, the Emiratis, Saudis, they are supporting the Salafis. The Saudis, they are in need of the Brotherhood and they are backing them. So we are talking about the other side is also religious groups. So maybe the sectarian dimensions is increasing throughout this war, but in the first level, before this war, we can say it is more regional division, it's more regional conflict.
Abdul Ghani?
No, nothing to add.
Okay.
Also, I can add something that, for example, the Salafis in the south, when the Emiratis called them to fight in the north, to fight in the western coast with Tariq, for example, they refused for regional reasons. They said, okay, we are fighting for the southern coast and we are not going to involve in the fighting in the north. So we can see how regional reasons or her regional motivation in Yemen is much higher or is much more important than sectarian motivation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question is an interesting one because, again, it touches on some of the points that the two of you discussed. Thinking in terms of the future prospects for peace. In our previous questions, we touched a bit on the role of the US, if there's a Biden president. You talked about the role of Saudi Arabia, how it factors heavily into an eventual peace process. What about the domestic dimension of a peace process? What are the prospects in the view of the two of you, maybe starting with Abdul Ghani, for the main warring factions domestically in Yemen, the Houthis, Islah, and others, to agree to work together as part of some kind of unity or coalition post-war government?
I think it's possible. Yemenis don't hate each other that much. They can still work together. And we have examples from our contemporary history where wars were followed by governments of national unity and so on. However, the problem that we face now, thanks to Saudi mismanagement of the conflict, is that we have a very strong, one party is very strong, both militarily and institutionally, and the other party is very weak in both accounts. So the way that the Saudis have led the country to this imbalance of power means that the agreement, any future agreement, is going to be dictated by the Houthis. Basically, the Houthis will generously invite the other parties to come back and be given amnesty and a small share of power. And this makes, of course, that's unlikely to be accepted by the other parties. So what I think will be possible to achieve is to freeze the situation as it is, where each party remains in place. We develop the local governments. It's a difficult task, but it can be done. And Houthis will take a larger share of the national government, but the other parties will be basically autonomous in their areas until such time that Yemeni state institutions are restored, rule of law is brought to an acceptable level, and then we think about having Yemen back as a real one country, unified country.
Lisa?
Yeah, I agree with him that we have to establish a decentralized state. And it's the same point that I mentioned, that we have to support or encourage local governance in Yemen, especially that the Houthis, they are very strong military-wise, and this did not encourage most of the other small and weak groups, other groups like Brotherhood, like other southern groups, that they are to involve with him in any power sharing, because they know he will take the biggest power sharing, while they are not the biggest social group, but they are the strongest. So this is not encouraging a lot, but this is what we can do. We have to admit that this is the result of this messy war. Yeah, this war was led by the Saudis in a very messy way, and led to this results that it is totally the opposite direction, totally the opposite aims that the Saudis claim they are starting toward to do it.
Thank you. Next question from Caroline, actually one of my favorite topics in studying Yemen, the influence of Iran over the Houthis. Maybe starting with you, Maisa, this time. How much influence does Iran have over the Houthis? What is Iran trying to achieve, right? If I can add that, what is the end game for Iran here?
Yeah, at the beginning, before the war, we can say, at the beginning with the Houthis, they were a very small group. The Iranian influence was in their discourse and in their speeches, but you can't find many things that prove that they are motivated by Iran. They have that local roots. Saada is the stronghold of Imama in Yemen, and Imama ruled Yemen for centuries. But they were influenced by Iran, definitely. I think since 2011, Iran started to influence more in Yemen and invest more with the Houthis. And after the war, the Iranians say that they feel that the Houthis, they are very strong player in Yemen. They have all the motives to fight Saudi Arabia, and they don't cost them a lot. Actually, they are financially dependent on themselves. They are not dependent on the Iranians. They are independent financially. But we have to remember they don't share the same religious reference with the Iranian, like Hezbollah or Shia militias in Iraq. They are a different sect. So we don't have to exaggerate this relationship, and we have to know that also that most of Saudi allies throughout all of these decades before, they are Zaydis. So it's not about they are hating Saudi Arabia. I think the Saudis, they can even deal with the Houthis. They can open channels with them. About what is the Iran endgame? For the Iranian, it's not costing, they don't cost them at all, this war. And it exhausts the Saudis. It weakened the situation. The reputation of the Saudis and the economy of Saudis, it affected negatively from this war, definitely. So they feel why the war can't continue. It's for them. They don't have real demands from this war, actually. So this is the problem with the Iranian. Actually, when we talk about neighboring states like Oman, Saudi Arabia, they have some interest for having a stable neighbor state on their neighbors. They say they are afraid from the influence of this war on their security, on their national security. But the situation is different when we deal with Iran, with Qatar, with the Emiratis. It's very difficult to find an end game for them, their real demands. But with Saudis, with Omanis, it's something different. If they feel that they can secure their borders with the Yemenis, and they find a minimum, and there is a minimum level of stability in Yemen, this will work for them, for their interest, actually. So it's something totally different for the Omanis and Saudis. It's totally different than other far states like Qatar and Emirates and Iran.
Thank you. Abdul Ghani, do you want to add something?
Yeah, very quickly. The Iranians used to call the Houthis the lumpen Shia, the ragged Shia. Now, I think the Houthis have risen in the hierarchy of Shiism because of their successes. But in the meantime, I think their reliance, because of the escalation of the conflict, the reliance on Iranian support is increasing. And if this does not stop, there will come a time when they become inseparable from Iran. Right now, I think they can make a deal with the Saudis. They know that their future requires a deal with the Saudis. But if they continue, if the war continues at this trajectory, things might get difficult in a few years.
Thank you. So as I was scrolling over the list of questions, there's a number of questions on the South. So instead of reading them all separately, one by one, and because the South is obviously a very important topic that I think is relevant for us to address, I'll group them quickly together in one broad question and basically ask the two of you, maybe starting with Abdul Ghani, what can be done about the South? Can Yemen be a united country again, North and South? We've talked a bit about the peace process so far in your presentations and in answers to questions, but is it even conceivable? Is it doable when we factor in the Southern dimension? If independence is inevitable, can it happen? How can it happen? And is it viable? I find that in discussions about the issue of an eventually independent South Arabia or South Yemen, however we call it, that is a part of the equation or the question that sometimes we neglect. The South is not united. Not everybody in the South actually wants independence. One of you mentioned that quickly in your presentation. In Mahra, in Hadramaut, there's very different perspectives on the future of Yemen than you'll find in other perspectives in Aden or closer to Aden. So is it even doable? So that's a few different questions, but please pick whichever part you want to in your answer.
I'd like to start by saying that the fault lines within the South are at times greater than the fault line between them and their northern brothers. So talking about a southern state is unrealistic. That's number one. Number two, states are basically institutions. No institutions, then there is no state. And the institutions are in Sana'a. Whether people like it or not, the only guarantee for the resilience of the Yemeni state are the institutions in Sana'a. To expect that institutions will be built in Marib or Aden is unrealistic. I think that the Southern Transitional Council has every reason to exist, and they have very legitimate claims that they want their voice heard, they want to sit at the table. Unfortunately, the Hadi and the Bedouins of Abiyan Shabwa prevented the majority of the population from the Western governorates from having a fair share of power in the past 20 odd years since the 1994 war. So the only way I think we can keep Yemen as a state, and by extension as a unified state, is to have highly decentralized state where each region, each demographic bloc gets as much autonomy as is possible.
Thank you. Very good point. Maisa?
I agree with Hamad. It's very difficult to separate Yemen to south and north. And if we talk about separation, it's difficult to separate Yemen into two states. Now we have two entities in the north, not more than, it's more than two entities in the north. We have the biggest entity, which is the Houthis, and we have Taz, and we have Marib, and we have the West Coast. And in the south, the same thing goes with the south. We have many fragmentation, and definitely Hadramaut, they want their own demands. Mahra, they want their own demands. So it's very difficult if we talk about separation that we are going to be two states like it was in 1990. Because now south is dividing, north is dividing. But I always encourage that the Southrons should involve in dialogue between themselves to solve their problems, because this never happened in the South. And the STC, they are claiming that they are the sole representative of the South, and it's not realistic, and they know that. But they just ignore it to say that they have the only right to say what are the Southern demands, and it's not true. So I think the South always, it's the answer or the solution for the Southrons, it's a dialogue and Southern dialogue. And that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Hatem writes a very interesting question here, saying that one critical aspect of the war that often gets neglected or ignored is the war economy dimension. As in any other war, right? There's a significant war economy that has developed in Yemen. Can you tell us a bit about that? If this is an area that you have some familiarity with, and what does it mean for the peace process? Coming back to this question again, as in other situations of civil or regional wars, actors who have developed a significant interest in the war economy through weapon smuggling or other forms of smuggling can easily play the role of spoilers, because they have an interest in the war continuing because they make money out of it. So how is this an element in understanding the war in Yemen and challenges facing the peace process? Maybe starting with Maisa this time.
No, economy, it's about Abdul Ghani. He's
Okay.
better than me in this.
Okay, I think the war economy has been the main driver of the conflict over the past few years. When the Saudis started the war, it was partly desired by MBS to become a hero and then be worthy of the throne. When that didn't work, he turned his attention elsewhere, and the level of violence was reduced immensely, and during which time the Saudi side and the Yemeni government side then got themselves involved in lining their pockets, and the war economy then became the real force of the conflict, to the extent that the payroll of the internationally recognized government of several 100,000 soldiers, while in defending Marib, there are very few real fighting soldiers in the front. So yes, the war economy is now a huge obstacle to any peace agreement. However, if the Saudis cut the money and the government become less corrupt, I think there is a chance.
I can add to this that if we see the powers that the Houthis, they are the strongest military power, they don't have any oil-rich areas under their control, and this explains their expansion to Marib now. Also, the same thing goes with the STC. STC, they don't have any oil-rich areas, And most of these areas, that oil-rich areas, which is Shabwa, Marib, and Hadramaut Valley, are under control of forces that somehow loyal to Saudi Arabia, which is interesting to know.
Very, very small point before I move to the next question on oil resources in Hadramaut. From the Canadian perspective, Yemen is rarely much on the agenda here. And I mean over the decades, but for a number of years, a Canadian oil company, Nexen, which has been bought by a Chinese company since then, but in the 2000s, Nexen was a major player in the Hadramaut Valley. And when I visited the area, there were actually Canadian flags in Shibam and other towns in Hadramaut because of Nexen's presence, which is one very rare Canadian angle to all of this. Next question, very happy that somebody raised this because that was one of my backup questions if it hadn't come up. Can you tell us a bit about the Safer oil tanker off the coast of Yemen? What can you give a bit of background? Maybe we can start with, if I'll choose, Abdul Ghani, if you have more background on that. Can you just give us a bit of background in case some of our participants are not aware of what the issue is, and then explain a bit what the major problem is?
Well, it's the Safer vessel is a floating tanker / terminal. It used to be a tanker ship that was bought and then anchored in 7 kilometers off the coast as a terminal for the pipeline coming from Marib. And it is very old. It's over 50 years old now, and needed a lot of maintenance. The maintenance stopped about 4 years ago, and it began to corrode. It contains 1.1 million barrels of crude that could pollute the entire Yemeni coast and some of the neighboring countries and kill the fish, that the livelihood of several 100,000 people. The Houthis, clearly the Houthis don't want to solve the problem of Safer tanker because they want to use it as a military asset. If there is an attack, if there is an attempted amphibian attack from there, they will blow it up or let it get hit in the crossfire. However, hopefully, they have agreed recently to do the necessary repairs. And I'm hoping that maybe common sense will get the Houthis to agree to empty the vessel before it bursts.
Thank you. Maisa, did you want to add something to that?
Nothing, but I will assure the point that the Houthis believe that Safer is defending them from any attack from the western coast.
Yeah. Thank you. So I have a number of questions that in some cases were asked before I asked the question on Iran-Houthi ties, and in a couple cases I see scrolling down were added afterwards, basically asking for a bit more information on the nature of Iran's relations with the Houthis. So one in particular from Scott here is pushing us to give a bit more detail on the nature of Iran's support to the Houthis today. And part of the answer and part of the presentations gave some historical background to that. Military support, technology, drones, expertise, intelligence. How can you give us a bit more information on the nature of Iran's support, and also how much of a difference is it making for Houthi military power, for Houthi self-sufficiency, for example, in terms of long-distance strikes against Saudi targets? Maybe starting with Maisa.
Okay. Houthi, mainly the most important Iranian support for the Houthis, it is the military one, training, smuggling weapons. They support them military heavily in the military side. And this is very clear from the development of their fighting skills. So during this war, and when we talk about the first year, they can't launch any attack against the Saudis at the beginning. And all of their attacks were on the ground, and they lose a lot of fighters, and they didn't win a lot. And from these attacks on the Saudi borders, but now they are improving a lot. So this is clearly from the Iranian support, logistically support, military support, intelligence support, and economically they provide them support also. And also the Iranian connect them to their network. I mean, for example, the Houthis now, the media that is promoting for the Houthis, they are most of them the pro-Iranian media in the Arab world, for example. And outside Yemen, when you go to UK, US, they are using the influence of the Iranian and the allies of Iranian, like Iraqis, Bahrainis, something like this. So it connect them. Now they are not the only local power. If they are without Iran, they are just local regional power in a very small region, regional power inside Yemen. But with the Iranian, they are part of regional network, and this helped them a lot.
Thank you. Abdul Ghani, do you want to add something?
No, I think I covered the Iran bit. I'd like just focus that it is training, planning, and advice that is most valuable. Iranian support for the Houthis.
Okay, thank you. On the regional dimension, we have another question that was asking you to elaborate, Abdul Ghani, a bit on the UAE's role. And so the question asks, can you elaborate on the divisions between the UAE and the US when it comes to Yemen? And the question, actually, there's a follow-up on elaborating on decision-making in Saudi Arabia, which you've criticized quite a bit in terms of its paralysis and centralization. So maybe you can elaborate a bit on that too.
Well, I'll start with the UAE and the US divisions in Yemen. There are none. I think the UAE and the US are on a single note on how to proceed in Yemen. I think that they are seeking the same objective, which is to contain Saudi Arabia. As far as the decision-making in Saudi Arabia is just chaotic. I am not an expert. I'm not Saudi expert, but from what I gather from Saudi experts, that the institutions no longer talk to each other. They're not trusted by the top leadership, and nobody is willing to speak up when the top leadership makes a mistake. So this is typical. It's similar to what Saddam Hussein was in Iraq, basically.
Thank you. Maisa, do you want to add something?
I'm just want to talk about the differences between the Saudis and the Emiratis in their intervention in Yemen. The Emiratis are more organized, and throughout these 6 years, they established forces loyal to them, like Tariq Saleh in the north, and the STC in the south, and other factions in the south. While the Saudis, they are working with the existing powers. For example, they are relying till now on the Brotherhood, although they don't trust the Brotherhood. And it's interesting to see that the Brotherhood media is attacking the Saudis, and the Saudis attacking the Brotherhood, and they are still working together in the north. Saudis, they are dealing with the war in a very messy way. They are not organized like the Emiratis, and this is the most important thing. But also the Saudis, they are tending to be more compromising, more than the Emiratis. The Emiratis are more radical in their approach to the war and to their enemies. For example, when they deal with the Brotherhood, they are very radical, and they are trying to even not marginalizing them. They are trying to eradicate them, and they are hundreds of thousands of people. The members, it is the biggest political party in Yemen, the Brotherhood.
Okay, thank you. So one last question. I will combine 3 questions that I have, and I'll apologize for the many that are still there. I think the good sign is that there was very good participation, but unfortunately we won't have time to do them all. I have a few questions on the Saleh family. So I won't read them, but I'll just combine them. You mentioned in your presentation briefly the son of former President Saleh, his nephews, who were obviously very influential under their father/uncle's regime. They're still influential today. Can you tell us a bit more about where they are physically, what their status is, what their level of influence is, what control over armed units they have, and what are their prospects for the future of Yemen? What role could there be for them in an eventual peace process, as we discussed? Maybe starting with Maisa again.
Yeah. Ahmed Saleh, he's the oldest son of Ali Abdullah Saleh, and he was an ambassador of Yemen after he was removed from his position as the leader of Republican Guards. After Hadi removed him, he appointed him in Abu Dhabi as an ambassador, and he doesn't have any power actually on the ground. And he is, as a person, he's a very weak person. Most of or the rest of Saleh's family is in Oman, and they don't practice politics, as I know. Only Tariq Saleh, he's the only one who's involving now in this scene, in this conflict. And they have military fiction in a military base supported and funded by the Emiratis in the Western Coast. It's a very small area. And I don't know, I think the Emiratis, they are aiming from first of all, they are aiming from his presence, first of all, that to avoid that the Houthis controlling the area that is close to Bab al-Mandab Strait, maybe. Also to be close to the Brotherhood in Taiz, because this Western Coast is part of Taiz governorate, and the Brotherhood is controlling the governorate, and it is Taiz, it is the most populated city in Yemen, the third most populated city in Yemen. So it is an important city. So maybe also the Emiratis, they are aiming to fight or to annoy the Brotherhood and Taiz. It is another issue. But I don't know what is the future of Tariq Saleh. He's not popular in Taiz, for example. But we'll see. I don't know, actually.
Thank you. Abdul Ghani?
Yeah, I'd like to say that the medieval regimes in the Emirates and Saudi Arabia continue to recycle the same old political feudal lords. This is not going to work. If we ever go to through this vicious circle, Yemen will eventually collapse completely and will need decades to be restored. I think that those people who have already burned their bridges will never go back, and the entire Sana'a elite should lose most of its power in favor of local autonomy and local administrations.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, with apologies to the, I think I have 16 questions still lined up that I won't be able to go through. We will have to stop here. I want to say thanks to a number of people before we stop. I want, first of all, to say thanks to Pierre, who you cannot see, but we saw him, and he is the one who saved us as we were having technological challenges just before we started, and he's been the managing the tech side of all this, so thank you. Thank you, obviously, to Anna and the other staff at the Center for International Policy Studies at CIPS at the University of Ottawa, who managed all the logistics for the event. Of course, I want to thank Maisa and Abdul Ghani for your time, for a very useful presentation on Yemen. Thank you very much. That was great. I do want to add that the video for the event will be online on the CIPS website. We will be tweeting about it whenever it comes up in a few days, so you will be able, hopefully, to find it. I do encourage you to subscribe to the CIPS CIPS, the Center for International Policy Studies, to either its Twitter account or its email newsletter if you want to have a Canadian connection on the kind of international research that we do here. On that, I want to finish by just thanking everybody who attended. We went up to about 73, 74 people, I think, at our peak. Typically, when we do these events, when I organize events on Yemen, my goal is to bring a bit of a discussion of Yemen in Canada, which is important for me. And this is what we did, especially in the last 2 years with our in-person events. This year, I don't know the breakdown. I went quickly through the list of participants. I think a number of you are either here with me in Ottawa or at least in Canada. But I think a lot of other people are not in Ottawa, not in Canada, who attended this event. So that's great. That's one of the few benefits of the pandemic, is that we can bring people together like this for events that we would not have brought together if we had done in-person events. So thank you very much to everybody. Thanks again to Maisa and Abdul Ghani, and hopefully everybody have a nice day and a nice week.